The Alien Council gave humanity 3 hours to surrender. We responded by ending their entire war machine in under 9 minutes. And we didn't even break a sweat. A chilling silence echoed through the galaxy as Commander Draven Kor, Warfire, stood alone amidst the wreckage of 3,000 alien warships. The feed was still live. Billions watched in real time as the US Armada, built over millennia, burned into non-existence. He looked up at the shattered remains of the flagship Void Crown, smirked, and said, "This wasn't a battle, it was a reminder. They gave us 3 hours to surrender." The broadcast lit up every screen from Luna's dark side to the last surviving arcships above Mars. The Alien Council's voice, filtered through synthetic tones and superior disdain, spoke as if Earth's fate was already a recorded fact, not a pending choice. "This is the United Alien Species Council. Humanity is to lay down arms, submit its planetary AI cores, and prepare for integration. Resistance is mathematically futile. We have projected your total defeat in 3 hours." The screen cut to the face of Grand Strategist Varnzar Il Telmorak, his pallid exoskin glistening with chemical arrogance. He smiled, or something close to it. "You have our mercy, for exactly 180 of your Earth minutes. That was an hour ago." Now, in the cold chamber below the Atlantic Rift Command Node, Commander Draven Kor stood in silence, surrounded by black-armored elites known as the Thornborn. No one spoke. They never did before execution. In a room lit only by flickering tactical overlays and the hum of kinetic dampeners, the air itself felt like a held breath. Draven's voice broke the silence like thunder cracking a steel sky. 3 hours, he said, pacing with slow, mechanical steps. "That's how long they think it'll take to dismantle us. To erase 10,000 years of blood and survival. To reduce us to variables in their coward's math." He stopped in front of the Mirage core, a black orb pulsing with temporal energy, cradled in a gravity field like a god's heartbeat. "They think we're gonna fight this war on their schedule. On their terms." He turned to his team. 12 of them. 12 demons carved from pain and principle. Each had survived suicide missions, orbital failures, time rifts. Not a single one flinched. They see humans as unpredictable, chaotic, savage. What they don't see, what they can't, is that we never stopped learning how to be monsters when we had to. He stepped into the gauntlet frame. The nanothreads latched into his spine, binding his neurofeed to Mirage. "You don't give animals countdowns. You don't predict a wildfire's etiquette. You don't schedule a fucking extinction event." The room darkened. A silent quake rippled through the deck as the Void Crown, flagship of the alien fleet, entered low orbit. Satellites melted in its path. One of the Thornborn whispered, "They're here." Draven's lips curled upward. "They're early. Cute." The communication channel opened by itself, hijacked. The strategist's voice returned, smug and hollow. "Human core. You are known to us. You are dangerous. But not inevitable. You have 98 minutes remaining." Draven stepped forward, eyes burning like cold fire. "You already lost," he said calmly. "I'm not here to win your war. I'm here to erase it. Empty threats. You're stalling." "No," Draven said, pressing his gauntlet into the Mirage sphere. "I'm loading the gun." He raised his hand. Time fractured for a microsecond. Everyone in the room saw double, past and future selves flickering in place, screaming, dying, surviving. The Thornborn held their ground. They'd been warned. One step forward, Captain Vexhero, scar splitting his left eye. "Targets locked. Decoy fleet launched. The Council will track it and miss our vector. Just like you said." "Perfect," Draven muttered. "Now let's show them what war looks like when time itself picks a side." The ship trembled again. Not from attack, no alarms, no damage. Just pressure, like reality itself tensing before it snapped. The Thornborn were already climbing into drop pods, coordinates locked on the alien mothership. The Void Crown. Draven followed last. No speeches. No goodbyes. Only this. "Upload Mirage to my spine." And if I start bleeding from the ears, don't stop. That just means it's working. The launch tore through atmosphere in seconds. Pod interiors became red-lit tunnels of data and gravity. Draven's eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing the physical anymore. He was looking at quantum strings, collapse choices, outcomes with 0.000001% probability. And they all had one thing in common. Humanity wins. Not survives. Not retreats. Wins. When the pod smashed into the internal hull of the Void Crown, the aliens were still scanning for Earth's main fleet. The Thornborn burst out like nightmares forged in metal and hate. Pulse weapons ripped through corridors. Enemy bioforms crumbled under thermal blades and kinetic punches enhanced by localized chronowarp. Draven landed last. His gauntlet pulsed, manipulating milliseconds. Every movement became a prediction already fulfilled. He turned a corner and saw 3 elite guards, Ixari berserkers, genetically crafted for slaughter. He didn't slow down. They attacked first. He dodged between blinks. He shattered the skull of the first, twisted the spine of the second, and used the third as a human, no, alien shield, absorbing plasma rounds. He didn't stop walking. Draven reached the bridge. Varnzar was waiting, projected via hollow, tens of thousands of kilometers away. You've broken into my ship. Admirable. But meaningless. You can't win. Not in this dimension. Draven grinned, bleeding from one ear. I'm not in this dimension. Not anymore. He raised the gauntlet. Mirage pulsed like a dying star. Timelines frayed. The air screamed. One of the Thornborn collapsed, brain hemorrhaging from temporal feedback. Another whispered a prayer to a god that didn't exist yet. Draven took another step forward. You made one fatal error, Varn. And that is? You assumed we'd try to win this war, without rewriting it. He slammed the gauntlet into the floor. The ship exploded, not with fire, but silence. A rip through causality. Across the galaxy, the war ended before it began. Alien ships vanished from records. Battle memories were overwritten. The U.S. fleet that had hovered above Earth for 1 hour? Never arrived. Back on Earth, screens lit up. A single message appeared on every channel. This war never happened. You just think it did. And in the dark, with blood leaking from his nose and time unraveling around him, Commander Dravencore whispered, "Next time, don't give us a deadline." They breached the hull in silence. The Thornborn moved like phantoms through the alien flagship's arteries, black armor swallowing light, boots making no sound. Draven was last out of his pod, his chronogauntlet already pulsing against the back of his hand, its veins of energy twitching like nerves under pressure. The others gave him space, not out of protocol, but out of instinct. You didn't stand too close to warfire when the countdown hit 0. They cut down the first patrol within 5 seconds. The alien defenders, a squad of 5 Ixari enforcers, barely had time to raise their weapons before a razor thread whip severed 3 heads in one spin. Draven stepped over a twitching body, the gauntlet on his arm humming, syncing with the ship's gravity fields and time flow. A flicker rippled across the walls. He tapped his comm once. Chronovariance confirmed. This ship's already out of sync with local time. Mirage will cascade perfectly. Vex Harrow's voice answered, low and dry. We sure the core's here? They built their throne around it, Draven said. Big mistake. Draven's internal HUD scanned a junction of passageways. 6 directions, each leading deeper into the Void Crown's heart. The alien ship wasn't built like human vessels. It was a living labyrinth, organic infrastructure bonded with semi-sentient logic clusters. But Mirage had already burned through their encryption layers. Draven's map was rewriting in real time. Left corridor. Down 2 levels. Core vault is protected by a temporal nexus. They'll try to fold time to lock us out. Then we unfold it. Bex growled. They moved fast. Thornborn blades sliced through armor and biology. Enemies screamed only once, long enough for alarms to trigger across the ship. Red lights flickered. Defensive turrets deployed from the ceiling, But Draven's gauntlet pulsed, freezing them in microloops before they could fire. A plasma round grazed his shoulder. He barely noticed. "You okay, Commander?" Vex called. Draven grinned. "I haven't even started hurting yet." They reached the nexus. A shimmering wall of temporal light stretched across the vault entrance. Beyond it, the ship's core, a globe of compressed dark energy, pulsing with artificial gravity and dimensional bleed. The Thornborn paused. No one knew what would happen if they stepped through that barrier. It wasn't just a force field. It was a slice in time. "Move back," Draven said. He stepped forward alone, lifted his gauntlet, and pressed it into the fold. The world rippled. His vision split into thousands of images, of himself dying, killing, failing, laughing, screaming, burning. Futures collided with pasts. Universes bled together. He held on. A voice whispered inside his skull. "Not alien. Not human. Older. You walk where no mind belongs." Draven spit blood and grinned. "That's the whole point." He surged forward. The barrier collapsed. The vault door opened. Inside, the Mirage reactor, twinned with alien tech, waited. A hybridized monster of causality engines and forbidden human science. The aliens had stolen the prototype's echo during the Battle of Series 9. They'd been trying to reverse engineer it. But they didn't understand it. Couldn't. Only Draven had the neural key. And he was here to use it. The moment he stepped in, Varnzar's voice filled the chamber. The alien strategist wasn't projecting this time. He stood in the center of the vault, surrounded by elite guards, his skin marked with shimmering runes of foresight. "Draven Core," he said. "I predicted you would make it this far." Draven didn't slow. "Didn't predict how you'd die though, huh?" "You assume I fear death," Varn replied. "No. You fear irrelevance." The Thornborn poured into the room, clashing with alien elites. Screams echoed, weapons flared, but Draven and Varn stood locked in a circle of stillness. "You don't understand what you carry," Varn said. "You'll destroy causality, memory, identity. You'll break the galaxy." Draven stopped 10 feet away. His gauntlet surged with violent light. "Good," he said. "Let's start with you." Varn struck first. A beam of folded gravity lashed out, but Draven blinked behind him. The gauntlet's chronowarp let him skip frames of time. He struck Varn in the ribs, shattering his exoskeletal plating. The alien howled, twisting with unnatural speed, retaliating with a blade formed from quantum strings. Draven caught it mid-swing. "I've died 17 times already today," he growled. "I know how this ends." He drove his knee into Varn's throat, then slammed the gauntlet into the alien's chest. The feedback exploded, both were thrown across the room. Draven coughed blood, eyes unfocused. "Vex," he croaked. "You good?" "Still breathing." "Then hold the room." He crawled toward the Mirage interface. The gauntlet interfaced with the reactor. Lights flashed. The core pulsed. "Final authorization required," it said in a monotone voice. Draven whispered his old call sign. "Warfire." The core accepted. "Temporal rewrite initiated." Outside, the fleet orbiting Earth began to blink, literally, out of time. Whole warships folded and vanished. Council members gasped as their timelines corrupted. Their calculations shattered. Inside the ship, Varn screamed as he realized what was happening. "You fool! You've damned everyone!" Draven looked up, eyes blazing. "No. I just reminded the universe who we are." The reactor flared. Time inverted. Every memory, every outcome, every calculation by the alien council became obsolete. Across the galaxy, new memories replaced old ones. Wars the aliens thought they won were now defeats. Earth was no longer Tier 0. It had never been Tier 0. It had always been feared. The Thornborn stood dazed, bleeding, but victorious. Draven slumped beside the core, breast shallow. Vex limped over. "You okay?" Draven smiled. "I am now." Then the core faded to black. The galaxy screamed as the rewrite began. Commander Dravencore stood at the edge of the collapsing timeline, gauntlet fused to the Mirage core, body twitching as reality bent around him. His breath came in fractured pulses. He wasn't in the ship anymore. He was inside the war, inside the history of the war, tearing it apart thread by thread. Through the fractured layers of his perception, he saw entire battles blink out of existence. The siege of Mars, the surrender at Titan, the Ashfall retreat, all gone. In their place, human victories, human dominion, rewritten and burned into the new structure of time. The aliens didn't just lose the fight, they lost the memory of winning it. Inside the Void Crown, panic erupted. "You must shut it down!" Varnzar screamed, clutching his chest as time fissures cracked across his skin. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" Draven didn't move. The core glowed brighter, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. "I'm not ending the war," he said, voice distorted as if echoing through centuries. "I'm erasing it. I'm overriding every moment where you thought you had control. You're destroying history." Varn staggered toward him, each step slower than the last as his body began to fall behind the present moment. "This is madness." Draven looked at him, eyes glowing with something ancient and inhuman. "No. This is correction." The Thornborn struggled to hold their ground. One soldier dropped to a knee, vomiting blood, neural implants overheating from exposure to temporal feedback. Another screamed as his past self flickered into view beside him, reaching out before vanishing in a burst of static. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a baptism by chaos. Vex's voice cracked over comms. "We can't hold this much longer. Time's folding in on itself. The ship's starting to phase." Draven's fingers curled around the control interface. "You don't need to hold. Just watch." The Mirage core reached critical point. In orbit, alien ships began blinking violently, entire battlecruisers winking out of sync, their past trajectories colliding with rewritten futures. Crews screamed across comms as consoles melted under impossible data. Weapons refused to fire, systems refused to obey. Their machines remembered losing. Draven spoke into the universal broadcast line, his voice carried to every enemy fleet, every council chamber, every data node connected to the network. "You calculated this war down to the minute. You called us savages. Primitive. Predictable." He stepped forward, dragging the entire core's interface along with him, the cables and energy lines wrapping his arm like living veins. "But you forgot one thing. We're human." Across the galaxy, alien commanders froze as the word spread. For centuries, humanity had been the footnote in the great galactic script. Now they were the editors. "We don't follow probability. We break it." Draven stared into the feed, expression blank, voice razor sharp. "We don't fear the impossible. We weaponize it." He slammed his fist into the final trigger point. A shockwave burst from the Void Crown, not of force, but of memory. The rewrite solidified. Timelines realigned. The alien fleet above Earth? Gone. Not destroyed. Not retreated. They had never arrived. In their place, human command stations hovered silently, already fortified. Orbital cannons turned toward distant stars, not to defend, but to watch. Varnzar dropped to his knees, eyes wide with horror, as he felt the weight of his erased victories. You've made us the losers." "No," Draven said, stepping over him. "I made you irrelevant. You'll be hunted for this. Across every star. Every reality." Draven leaned in. "You'd have to exist in those realities first." He turned to his team. "Pull back. We've done what we came for." Vex coughed, blood in his helmet. "We're not dying?" Draven shook his head. "This isn't a suicide mission. It's a survival rewrite. We were always meant to walk away from this." The Thornborn started withdrawing, limping, carrying the wounded. Around them, the ship groaned as its structure failed to exist properly within the new timeline. Bulkheads twisted into fractals, decks looped in infinite corridors, screams echoed from futures that would never happen. Draven walked into the center of the chaos, letting Mirage burn its final fuel. All the while, the galaxy listened. "Let this be remembered," he said, voice booming through the galactic feed. "Humanity didn't survive your invasion." He raised his gauntlet one last time. "We deleted it." With that, the feed cut. Back on Earth, every screen flashed white for 3 seconds. When vision returned, humanity's history had changed. Monuments stood where there had been ruins. Military records listed victories never fought. Entire generations had grown up believing Earth was the dominant force in the stars. And somewhere deep in black site bunkers, classified files still recorded what had really happened. A council convened in secret, now fractured and unsure. Those who remembered the original timeline were few, and afraid to speak. They whispered one name, Warfire. They asked one question. What happens if he isn't done yet? And in a collapsing ship that had never existed, Commander Draven Core walked alone into the light, his body broken, his mind reeling, but his purpose fulfilled. Because somewhere in the galaxies that followed rules and order, one name would always remain beyond prediction. Humanity. The world didn't change all at once, it remembered differently. Across the stars, empires blinked and faltered. One by one, archives rewrote themselves. Tactical records transformed into footnotes of surrender. Strategic simulations adjusted automatically, their baselines corrupted by sudden, impossible human victories that hadn't existed the day before, but now always had. No explosions, no rebellion. Just quiet dominance. On the edge of reality, within what remained of the Void Crown's paradox core, Draven Core sat alone in the silence. His body was failing. Skin cracked, blood thin, breath shallow. The gauntlet fused to his arm now glowed with a dull crimson pulse. The Mirage engine, overloaded and burned through its final activation, was inert. His mission was complete, but time had taken its price. "You awake?" Vex's voice cracked through static on the comm. "Barely," Draven rasped. "Extraction en route." "You did it." "Earth's sky's clean. No fleets. No threats." "It always was," Draven muttered, a crooked smile curling his lips. "Now they remember it that way." He leaned his head back, letting the moment sink in. He couldn't hear gunfire anymore. No alarms, no sirens, no orders shouted in desperate frequencies. Just wind, real or imagined, blowing through the impossible chamber of a ship that no longer existed in the revised stream of time. Then came the voice. "You shouldn't have done this." Varnzar was still alive. Or what remained of him. Phased halfway into a wall, his body flickered between now and never. The alien's eyes blazed with fury and grief. "You've undone order. Erased truth. You think this will hold? That reality won't snap back?" Draven didn't even look at him. "It won't need to. The universe doesn't care about truth. It only follows momentum. I gave it a shove in the right direction. You've made yourself a god." Draven finally looked up. "No. I made humanity a problem no one dares to calculate again." "You've forged fear," Varnzar spat. "That's not peace. That's tyranny. Call it what you want," Draven whispered. "We call it quiet." Varn reached toward him, the motion fractured and slow, his arms skipping frames like a corrupted simulation. "We'll rebuild. Others will resist. They always do." Draven's voice dropped to a whisper. "And we'll always be waiting, already victorious." The last flicker of the alien strategist disappeared, devoured by a collapsed timeline that had no room left for him. The extraction vessel broke through the storm of reality distortion minutes later. The Thornborn loaded Draven inside. The pilot looked back only once, seeing the last fragments of the Void Crown dissolving into silence, as if the war had been a bad dream humanity had finally woken from. On the return trip, Draven remained silent. He stared out the viewport as they passed Earth's new orbital ring, already complete, already defended. There was no sign of the once looming enemy. No signs of desperation. Only the quiet hum of authority. Earth was no longer a backwater species. It was the center. Inside the black site known only as Watchpoint Zero, deep beneath the surface of the planet, the new timeline's version of the Galactic Threat Council convened in secrecy. Draven stood before them, no fanfare, no salute. "You tampered with time," one of them said, voice mechanical. "Do you have any idea what the long-term damage might be?" "Yes," Draven replied flatly. "Then explain your justification." He stepped forward, letting the silence press against them. "You want the truth?" he asked. "They weren't just going to conquer us. They were going to override us. Strip us to genetic code and recycle our culture into compliant husks. You want to lecture me about collateral damage?" Another figure leaned forward. "So you rewrote history in our favor?" Draven nodded. "It was the only way to win." "No. You didn't win," the voice said. "You made it so they never fought." Draven smirked. "Same thing." The room was quiet. "Do they remember?" "Enough to be afraid," Draven said. "Enough to not ask questions." "And you?" "I remember everything," Draven said. "Every version. Every loss. Every variant where we begged for mercy. Where they made us less than animals." He stepped closer, eyes hard. "So I made sure those versions don't exist anymore." "None of them." Silence stretched. Then, "And what do we do now?" Draven turned. "You build," he said. "You prepare. Because even if they can't remember what we did, deep down, they'll always feel it." "Feel what?" He faced the group one last time. "The moment we stop being prey." He walked out of the chamber without waiting for permission. No one followed. No one spoke. Because somewhere deep in their reconstructed minds, they remembered something too. Maybe not a full memory. Maybe not even an image. But the feeling. The fear. Draven left Watchpoint Zero and stepped into the light. The new world gleamed above him. Cities in the sky. Defense stations that had always been there. A people no longer underestimated. No longer mocked. The only trace of the original timeline remained in his body. The gauntlet, now fused into bone and flesh, pulsed faintly, like a relic of something terrible and beautiful. Behind him, a new war monument had been erected. Not to battles. Not to victories. To erasure. On the black monolith, one line was engraved in all galactic dialects. "You predicted our defeat in hours. We ended the war in minutes." And beneath that, unsigned, were 3 words burned into legend. Commander Draven Core.